Welcome to the Four Corners Orff chapter presentation on culturally responsive teaching in music. My name is Katrina Hedrick, and I'm very excited to be here today. Our goals are to look at how are we already serving our students, and how can we increase our practices as culturally responsive teachers in music education. So our goal today, which is part one of part two sessions, is looking at ways to understand how are we already serving our student musicians and how can we increase our culturally responsive teaching practices. And through the skills of exploring our frameworks of Zaretta Hammond and Geneva Gay, these CRT kind of staples in the field right now, reflecting on our current teaching practices, and then applying our own personal teaching artistry to increase in our efficacy as a music teacher. And then why should I do any of this? Is to provide your student musicians with an authentically meaningful music education, regardless of your teaching circumstance. So my personal why. I am from the Four Corners area. I lived in Kirtland, New Mexico, and in Bayfield, and Durango, and Mancos, and around the Navajo Lake area, Arbalise and Allison. Um, and I attended high school in Ignacio. I graduated college from Fort Lewis, and I had the privilege of teaching in Ignacio, the middle and high school position, for 5 years before moving to the Front Range. My path was very meandering, and I'm really excited to be reconnecting with some of my colleagues from when I was in college at Fort Lewis there and teaching in Ignacio, and having the honor of being in the Four Corners chapter when we were just getting started back in the day. So my path as a music teacher, my personal why, I am a white woman who experienced racial prejudice growing up. And I held anger in my heart during college. And then I had this transformative understanding of systemic racism when I was working at Ignacio. And then I began to really truly understand my own white privilege and the trauma of American history when I moved to the Front Range in my 30s. So growing up as a white girl in Ignacio was a hard experience because I did experience a lot of racial prejudice against myself for the color of my skin. And I didn't totally understand why until I had the opportunity to teach there and develop my relationship with the community and understand the deeper levels of trauma in our area of the Southwest. So, to that leading into this idea of being a culturally responsive music teacher in America, you have to acknowledge and address some of the following truths. That one, America is a colonized nation, and it was built through systemic racism and other forms of oppression. That people of color, and particularly Black Americans, as enslaved people, built the physical and economic infrastructure of America. Indigenous people of the Americas were enslaved and almost eradicated by Spanish colonizers, and these actions led to the development of Hispanic and Latinx cultures. Natives continue to express oppression through institutionalized segregation of reservations, forced assimilation into boarding schools, which are thankfully no longer in practice anymore, and then other structural practices that are such as non-consensual sterilization that was even up into the 90s, a standard practice at BIAs. So while there's a large absence of Black culture in the Southwest, people of Indigenous, Latinx, and Hispanic cultures share a parallel of generational trauma of American history. So people who are Black, Brown, Indigenous, and or Asian continue to experience this racism today. So taking a moment, pause the video, and ask yourself, is there anything that you might disagree with the statements that I just made? Notice your feelings when you think of these truths. If you're feeling angry or offended or attacked, ask yourself why you might be feeling this way. And if you'd like, um, add your thoughts through the notes, and we'll talk about them in our discussion next week. So moving with these truths, moving forward with these truths, we and our students, we need to recognize this, that we are the result of our history in all its joy and pain. America is a rich and dynamic reflection of our American history. And most American music teachers did not experience a culturally responsive education because of the almost exclusive dominance of Western art music in institutional education. We are forging new paths for ourselves as musicians and teachers and for our students. So, with all of this in mind, I began to look for what types of music education my students and I actually deserved. Which genres of music should I really be teaching? What concepts are the most important? Should I be teaching Western art music at all? So, what I would like you to do is pause, and I'd like you to consider and figure out in your own way on the following. Why are you a music teacher? What has been your journey in becoming and developing as a music teacher? Why did you love, what did you love about your personal music education? What do you wish you would have experienced or learned that you didn't either by choice or opportunity in your music education? What kind of music education would you like your students to experience? Go ahead and pause this video and think about the following, and then when you're ready to move on, start it up again. Okay, so with all of this in mind, our goals as a music teacher, what should our goals as a music teacher be in this 21st century? What should we be teaching our students? What do I believe is the most important music I want my students to know and practice through their lives? What are the most important cultures or genres of music we should be teaching? What do our students need from music in our current society? With the pandemic, with the most recent exposure of racial prejudice, systemic racism, and brutality and violence, what's the point of music education? Go ahead and pause again and write down your thoughts regarding these questions. So, when I came up to grad school, this is the wonderland I fell into after diving into these rabbit holes. Studying contemporary philosophy and music education policy, the national art standards, state standards, educational policy, blah, blah, blah. It turns out that our goals of a music teacher are ultimately to help provide our students with having an active musical life. So they may use music to interpret and experience their lived experiences as either ambassadors who are listening to music and connecting to others by sharing their personal thoughts, feelings, and ideas about music. As producers, they're producing or performing on an instrument digitally or through movement using specific skills, or they're creators and they're creating new music to express thoughts and feelings and ideas of their lived experience through various mediums. So that breaks into these ideas of how are our students listening and sharing music? How are they performing? And how are they creating? And then the microstructure of ultimately what knowledge and skills and dispositions are they developing? So as ambassadors, they're developing the knowledge of how are we expressing our thoughts, feelings, and ideas through music. The skills they employ are active listening, interpreting, selecting, sharing with intention. And the disposition is always the same. Why should we be doing this? for their own personal identity, connection, and responses. So they may better understand their own thoughts, feelings, and ideas, and to connect to others through music. As performers, the knowledge they're learning, or how are they expressing their thoughts, feelings, and ideas through our instruments and bodies. The skills are development of our body awareness, instrument technique, and refinement of musical practice. Again, for the same personal identity, the reason is how are they cultivating their artistic dispositions? And then creating, how do we want to express our thoughts, feelings, ideas in music? And then choosing a specific medium and specific skills to express these thoughts, feelings, and ideas. All with this goal of how are we working towards better understanding and expressing our own thoughts, feelings, and ideas. How are we connecting to others through music, especially in this pandemic, this global trauma that we're all experiencing. So now that we've talked about our goals as music educators, the point of music education, let's talk about what does it mean to be culturally responsive. Looking at Geneva Gay's 6 pillars of culturally responsive education, she states that every educational experience must include the following. It must be validating to the student. It must be empowering to them. They must be experiencing a comprehensive and multidimensional experience that transforms their thinking and emancipates their mindset. Those are 6 words, but they have a lot of weight. What does that exactly mean? So, let me move my little face. Validating students' intersectional identities. Intersectional identity is that place where they combine their race, class, gender, ableism, other forms of identity and community connections that they have that form who they are as a person. So, how are their representations of their identities and their communities in class models, class themes, literature, and class cultural values? What opportunities for making choices or expression of thoughts, feelings, and ideas do these students have in class? How are we empowering students to practice agency? So, the opportunities to practice critical thinking and decision making in meaningful ways for self, for a small group, or in the classroom. How are they experiencing feelings of successful engagement? Having a comprehensive curriculum, which is exposure to a variety of experiences. This exposure and practice of content in various genres and activities. In a diverse variety of genres and activities. How are students engaging in multidimensional platforms? So exposure and practice of content through various mediums. They're learning through them by themselves. They're learning with a peer, through a teacher, through technology. Are they doing it verbally, auditory, literary, iconic, physical? What are the ways that they're engaging with the concept? I hope you're starting to think about how we can connect Orff and these other music elemental pedagogies that are really such amazing approaches to teaching meaningful music. The last 2 we have transformative of students' preconditioned mindsets. So I can't make music. I don't know how to. I have no connection with. I got kicked out of the recorder club once and I'll never play it again. I couldn't play the alto saxophone when I was in middle school. I'll never play music again. These are more narratives we're hearing from adults when they find out we're music teachers, right? So, how are we challenging and expanding these personal and contextual understandings for people, for our students, for them to realize that they're able to do much more than they ever believed they could? And that leads us to this emancipatory of social constructs that hinder personal engagement. I know I get pretty wordy, but how are they independently choosing to engage in the content? Not only how are their minds transformed, but how are they making that choice to engage in a way that's meaningful to them? What does that look like? Let's compare the two now between music education and culturally responsive teaching. A comprehensive curricular approach is a consistent structure with balanced engagement in the areas of creating, producing, and connecting. So personally and contextually, so their own personal and within their context of their communities, their lived experience through a variety of different musical cultures. So there's not one that's the best. It has to be a variety of experiences because you can't stereotype your student based on your own predisposition, your own inherent biases. We have no idea what the student's going to love. We have to give them a variety of experiences and a comprehensive curriculum so they develop their skills, knowledge, and disposition. That looks like something around this area with my funny little graphic. A class can look like these ways of creating, performing, and connecting to music in these specific skills, knowledge, and disposition. We looked at this a little bit ago in a different kind of structure, but how are the students doing it as a class? How are we doing it as a group? And how are they doing it individually? With this idea of what enduring understanding are they walking away with? And what essential questions do they know how to ask? And this process is validating and it is empowering and it's transformative and it's emancipating if it's done consistently with these elements included. So, looking at some ideas, how do we embed diverse musical cultures into curriculum? Well, if we're Orff teachers, if we're Kodai teachers, if we're teaching at the general music or K5, K8 level, it's the opportunities are abundant and we're seeing a lot of really brilliant teaching in these Orff and Kodai workshops that you choose to go to, and props to you for being committed to that because that makes us better teachers. So thank you for being here. Let's look at some of these ways just as ideas. Let's see what you're already doing. So regular listening activities that expose students to a variety of genres. I do something called the Artist Spotlight every day where we listen to something with a specific theme. Last week was Melody Week, so a lot of stuff with voices specifically. Next week will be Harmony, so we'll look at multiple voices. Choosing the choice of your ensemble repertoire, many of you are teaching in larger ensembles, to represent diverse subgenres of instrumentation. So if you're teaching orchestra, how many different genres of music are you including in your orchestra literature, or are you listening to and learning about in your orchestra class? How are we connecting social themed units to other contents? So American history and current current issues, math, language arts, therapeutic strategies. How do we deal with anxiety and depression in a pandemic? How do we create community rituals virtually or in hybrid learning with masks on our faces and shields? And how are we doing, how do we create class routines that are meaningful to us using music? Having unit themes based in specific genres is another way. It's like, okay, this week is blues, this week is jazz, depending on the situation. You're going to know what works best for your students, but how are we organizing our classes to provide a variety of diversity in musical genres students are exposed to? And then think about teacher chosen material versus student chosen material. How are students choosing? Is it something they share with the class? Is it something they share with a small group? Or is it something they share privately as an individual? I learned so much from students and why they listen to the music they listen to and what they feel like it represents. And I discover a lot of really great new music through them too. I'm often surprised by what they listen to. So looking at this diversity, and I think I'm going to have to get rid of my picture. Effective teaching practices then prioritize this idea of teaching the process of artistry, which is Orff all day. So the students can cultivate their independent artistic disposition or their creative mindset through comprehensive internalization of musical knowledge, skills, and disposition in balanced and multidimensional ways. Wow, that's a lot. There's a lot of words right there. But that's so easily done in music if you have that intention. So looking at these ideas of multidimensional platforms. It could be, how are students engaging in oral skills? How are they using iconic and symbolic literacy, so traditional notation or symbols? How are they teaching each other? How are they being taught by you? How are they being leaders and teachers? How are we engaging in technology, which we're heavily relying on nowadays? What kind of kinesthetic activity or movement is associated with it, and we're learning through it? And what kind of global and local resources are we connecting our students to learn more? Again, I teach middle and high school, so what I do with my students is going to be a little different. Now, teaching middle and high school does not mean that I have choice in the students that get to be in my class or the schedule. It's like a general music class. I might see a student for a quarter, I might see them for multiple years. You never know. Looking at how are we engaging in these comprehensive artistic processes through the national standards, we see like, how are students imagining? How are they selecting music? How are they planning and making a musical project? How do they interpret it? How are they rehearsing it, evaluating and refining it, and presenting? So it turns out music, if we're being truly artistic music teachers, we are being culturally responsive for our students. Suzuki really has an emphasis on the melody, learning the melody through oral skills, approximation, which is how the micro concept to the macro to the micro, um, playing the general concepts and then developing the micro skills through time. The use of symbolic notation, this traditional notation, and then early development of instrument technique. Kodai's emphasis is on singing games, the development of the melody, proper vocal technique, the path from oral to iconic to symbolic literacy, the path of the experience to concept, prepare, practice, and present pathway. Dalcroze is a huge influence in many of the other pedagogies, but his main focus was on reflecting musical expression in the body before you can do it in the instrument or do it in more fine and abstract ways. How can you have this embodiment of the concept before mastery of its cognitive knowledge? Orff, our beloved Orff Keatman approach, focuses on speech and the use of movement as influenced by Delcroze, singing as influenced by Kodai, playing different instruments, teaching harmonic orchestration, improvisation to teach musical concepts, and then a focus really on abstract expression. How do we use different mediums to express our ideas and connect with others? The conductor or the artistic director centric model has a large emphasis on authentically expressing pre-composed artistic work, and symbolic literacy, this idea of an organism working together as a whole to provide this expression. And then the structure of that collaborative combo has an emphasis balance between iconic, oral, and symbolic literacy, depending on the culture. Chamber music from Western art culture really focuses on literacy, as you would expect, without a conductor often. Folk and traditional cultural music is the looking at a specific ethnic tribe or cultural value in music making and the genre. And then looking at American popular music and the way that music is organized and the social music of American popular music. You can look at a lot of what Little Kids Rock is doing, focused on iconic literature and this idea of approximation. Let's look at now this, how do we differentiate between the different classes, the different age groups? So moving from early childhood to secondary models, many of these things connect throughout. I use a lot of the early childhood and primary models at the secondary level, depending on my students' engagement or their skills, knowledge, and disposition at the secondary level. So the younger they are, the large group practice focus is essential. Many activities, but in attenuated ways. This focus on play and imagination, gross motor activities, large body movements, extensive repetition with variation, and then the idea of experience first to concept. As we get into the secondary models, it moves to more of a focus on small group or independent practice, less activities, but in more depth with more meaning. The stronger connection to social emotional focus, social political identities, and a larger emphasis on fine motor activities. So we're taking this experience of imagination and play and musical wonderland to the craftsmanship of their artistic expression. So students have this experience of validating their identities and empowering their voices, transforming their mindset of what they can achieve, and emancipating their belief in what they can achieve and what they want to say to express their social and artistic identity. Through the use of meaningful connection themes in music, this connection, this process of an experience of how to ask what are the essential questions in music, how do we develop enduring understandings through some sort of meaningful project theme, so they may be able to interpret and express their lived experience in ways that increase their quality of life and improve their social conditioning or their societal conditions depending on the situation. So how do we really do that? Let's look at, I'm going to put myself in the corner. Our I have this thing called Artist Spotlight, and it allows us to have these different connections of analyzing music for content in musically, their artistic statement, the social context, and the personal meaning. How are students choosing music, and how are they sharing it? Is it public or is it private? And then how is the teacher choosing music? And through the unit themes of music or musical themes, social, and personal connection themes. And then in the creation performance section of our comprehensive music education, how are students making critical decisions of musical content, our social meaning and artistic statement, and their personal meaning? Is the student choice private, small group, or class option, a combination of those? And then how is the student making or the teacher making choices in their themes that connect to music, society, and the student's personal needs and identity? This is the path to having the students' experience of validating, empowering, transformative, and emancipating musical education. So here are some other options we can look at. It has to be, in order for this to be an environment that's safe for students to learn in, that achieves these 4 pillars, it has to be consistent. It has to be a predictable structure where students can make meaningful decisions. And they have these opportunities in both their class process and the class product. This could look like emphasis on individual, group, and class artistry. What kind of artistic choices do they want to make? What do they want to say? How are students individually or in a group or in a class, how are they making a choice or sharing their voice? It could be done in order of which activities are approached, the number of variables or a variable in the activity, or the number of variables in an activity, specific connections to themselves, their community, their society, their reflection on an experience. How are they creating goals around our class process or project? Students could have choice in predetermined variables within an independent project. You can do A, B, or C, but this is what we're all doing together. You can do it in these 3 ways. What would you like? Or having student voice in their artistic statement of a project or a theme. Something that my school, Bruce Randolph, is really focusing on this year is Black excellence. And me as a white girl can only speak to Black excellence to a certain degree. It's my opinion of what I believe Black excellence is. Now, saying that to my mostly Black and brown students and only leaving it there would not be culturally responsive. Even if I provide a variety of experiences, I need to give them an opportunity to speak their truth of what they believe is Black excellence. So, what I would like you to do until we meet again, I want you to sit and I want you to think about all this jargon that I threw at you, all these ways that you're already a music teacher that is being culturally responsive. List however it works for you. How are you providing opportunities that validate our students, your students? How do you provide opportunities that empower them? How do you provide opportunities to have a comprehensive music education experience? How are they creating music? How are they listening and connecting to it? And how are they performing it? What are the different ways that they are learning and teaching themselves and each other? And we're learning together. Um, how are students being transformed in their understanding of what they're able to do? And how are students emancipated in their mindset of what they can do and what they want to do in music? Thinking about just your current practice, where are these showing up for you? And looking back through the different slides, um, I'm sure you're doing so many of these things, especially as an Orff teacher. So what I would like to do next is, after we've had time to digest all of this, come back on the 21st and we'll have a live Orff Zoom meeting. And I'll give a more Orphean example of a class with us here synchronized together. And then we'll talk about your thoughts and feelings and ideas that you had during this session. And we will be writing a statement about being culturally responsive Orff teachers moving forward. So thank you again so much for being here. I'm so honored and excited to have this conversation with you and talk about it specifically in the context of the Four Corners and the Southwest, because there is a lot of trauma there. And because it's a mostly rural area, it is often not discussed, and it is not provided the support that metro areas like Denver experience. So thank you for being here, and thank you for being willing to improve your practice. Here's some different resources that were referenced or would be good to explore, that are coming from this presentation. Geneva Gay, I mentioned several times. She's kind of the pinnacle in a lot of ways, starting this conversation. Lyndon McCoy did a book based on that approach in culturally responsive teaching and music education that I really recommend. Zaretta Hammond defined this ignite, chunk, chew, create, or review form that I used. My school is really emphasized on it right now, so I was practicing it. By Folks Who Teach in the Hood is a phenomenal book that really makes a lot of connections that were meaningful for me after teaching Ignacio. What he calls neo-indigenous. He talks a lot of parallels between our Black, Brown, Indigenous, and Asian communities and their experiences in our educational system. Um, and then talking about music education, Orff Capeman approach, phenomenal. It's authentically culture responsive if you included some variety of experiences and diverse cultures in there. Teach Like It's Music is a really phenomenal book by Doug Goodkin that talks about music in several ways that are culture responsive and with beautiful application. And then we mainly went off of the National Core Art Standards here: performing, connecting, creating. And a lot of the philosophy and theories that I'm discussing now are coming from these philosophers, Estelle Jorgensen and Bennett Reamer, which I'm happy to talk to you more about. So thanks again for being here, and I look forward to seeing you next week.